It looks like a sea. You see water in the end, around the river by. How long it will last.
You see the second class?
Yeah, let's kick it off.
I think we'll go ahead and get started. First, I just want to thank you for coming. Just a couple housekeeping things. If you haven't signed in yet, there's a sign up on that table right back there. If you wouldn't mind signing in. Bathrooms are right over there. The women's here, men's is back there. Bar is open if you want to get something, help yourself. But anyway, I want to thank you for coming. And this is kind of a joint effort between Barron County Farm Bureau and Barron County Farmers Union. Kind of just the goal here is just an informational meeting about renewable energy. You know, there's a lot of talk about how we're going to meet all the goals that have been set for renewable energy in the next few years. And we really wanted to set a forum where we could have a speaker come in that has a lot of knowledge about a lot of different types of renewable energies. And so that when decisions are being made on what direction as a county or a state or a country we're going to go, those decisions can be made by informed information. And that's really the goal tonight. So the way we're going to kind of do this is I'll introduce the speaker here in just a minute. He'll go through some different things, different types of renewable energies. And then we'd like to have time at the end for questions. So if you got a question when he's talking, if you just jot it down or something, then we'll have a question and answer session toward the end. If anybody wants, we do have a microphone system. If you can't hear something, let us know, and we can use that. Otherwise, it will probably be okay. It's a small enough room. But be sure to ask, you know, if you can't hear or something. So with that, I guess I'd like to introduce our speaker for tonight. This is Scott Coenen. I'll kind of let him give you his background, but he's was recommended to us actually, and because he's got a large knowledge base in a lot of different renewable energy type things. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Scott and we'll roll.
Awesome. Thank you, Craig. I appreciate it, everybody. I was kind of talking with some people earlier. I started the organization specifically because I thought people were doing a bad job talking about renewable energy. People either have rose-colored glasses on about it and are looking to blow smoke up your butt and unwilling to acknowledge some downsides to these technologies, or people are too focused on the downsides and unwilling, I think, to see some of the opportunity that exists with it as well. So I wanted to start this organization and start having conversations with people exactly like yourselves across the state. There's opportunity here for us, but there are also very significant challenges with the implementation of these technologies, and we just have to be upfront about it. There is no point in not acknowledging this stuff and not talking about it honestly. So I started my career, I studied business and economics at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, actually. I'm from the Green Bay area, outside of Green Bay, and from the village of Hobart originally, in the Fox Valley area. Then I kind of caught the political bug for a little while. I went into Madison, unfortunately, and started working for former Governor Walker, and did what I think are a lot of good things. Then after a few years, really burnt out, and I guess I started to hate politicians. So I wanted to start something different, an organization, like I said, that was talking about the future, talking about new technologies, but again, doing it in an honest way. So I built the organization from the ground up a little bit, put together a board of directors for myself, and now I kind of live just outside of Madison, and we try and influence these discussions at a state level as much as we possibly can, because again, I think there are a lot of people here that are just either not being realistic or not looking at some opportunities. So I'll get in. I think my goal here, and please tell me if I'm boring you guys at all, but I want to give you a 30,000 foot view for a second here why things are happening right now the way they're happening, at least why I think we are moving into some of these new technologies. What have we been doing for the past 100 years? What do we think we're going to do for the next 100 years? What exactly that means for Wisconsin? I won't BS you. We are supportive of renewables writ large, but I also think that we're able to have conversations about some of the major drawbacks to renewable energy. So I'm going to roll through this presentation as fast as I absolutely can, because I'd really like to just talk with you guys and have a question and answer. That's what I think is probably the most important. So I've been in this for about 5 years now, and I have traveled to every single corner of this state, talked to every single group you could think of about renewables, and I have tried as hard as I can. I'm not an expert, but I am an amateur expert, I think, as much as you can be in this space. So I hope I can bring a little bit of humility to it as well, because I don't think everybody has all the answers on this one, because there are some things that we genuinely don't know yet. So I'll just get in with a detail. I put together, like I said, a pretty active board of directors. Obviously, everybody kind of recognizes former Governor Thompson in there, but a number of other people have been state leaders across the state of Wisconsin for a lot of years. We do have a national network as well. This all started in Michigan about 5-6 years ago. Now we have 21 states in our statewide network. So this conversation that we're having is not just Wisconsin. It's not just the Midwest. We're having it across the country, right? In a lot of different places, in a lot of different areas of this country. So I can tell you the conversations in Wisconsin don't look that different from the convos in Texas, from the conversations in Florida, even out west in Colorado. They all kind of have a very similar tenor. Everybody is struggling with what we're going through right now. I do want to just be upfront about our approach. I put the organization together to be a business voice. I wanted to be a conservative, market-oriented perspective on energy. I thought it was missing somewhat. I'm not exclusive to wind and solar, although we seem to be talking more and more about just wind and solar. I also think one of the jobs that we need to do is we need to expand our definition of what renewable energy is, period. There are a lot of different versions of renewable energy that do not get talked about, whether it's anaerobic digestion, renewable natural gas, even clean fuels like ethanol, although I don't spend a ton of time talking about ethanol. I'm very excited about the next generation of nuclear, what nuclear can look like in the next 10 to 15 years. I think it's going to play a huge role for us in this country and the world. But those don't often get talked about in a conversation that increasingly is getting crowded out by just wind and solar for whatever reason. I cannot explain why we are doing that, but we are doing that to some degree. So we're trying to emphasize all of these things because the more varied our energy sources are, the stronger I think we are as communities and the stronger we are as a country. And that should be our message, period. I try to apply conservative principles to what I see as energy markets that are changing and technology that's changing. So my principles are pretty simple. If it's market driven, if it's cost effective, if it's economically viable, if it is conducive to the United States of America being more energy independent, to Wisconsin being more energy independent, and maybe us as business owners and households being more independent at the individual level, I'm supportive of it. I think it's a good thing. And at the end of the day, I really want it to be reliable, and I want it to lead to more economic growth. Wisconsin is competing with every other state in the nation, and this country is competing with every other country across the globe. We need reliable power, and it needs to be at a price that is attractive. Those are all principles. That's popular, right, with a lot of different people. For whatever reason, the discussion that we're having in energy right now, even in Madison, nobody's really applying those principles, I think, effectively. And that is a big, big problem. We're missing out for it. So I'll just start for a second, kind of again, that 30,000-foot view. One of the best things that we've done in the last 10 or 15 years is figured out how to do energy efficiency projects. The most efficient electron you're going to have is the one that you don't use, the one that you don't spend money on, period. So I encourage people, before you start looking at renewable energy, say solar panels or something like that, there is almost always something you can do to increase the efficiency of your home, to increase the efficiency of your business. Those are almost, the return on investment is almost always 2 to 3 years on those things. They always make sense, and it saves energy right out the gate. That best thing you can do for your pocketbook, that is the best thing you can do for the environment, that is the best thing you can do, period, is try to squeeze more energy out of efficiency out of what we already do exist. And we're doing a good job of that in this country now. Obviously, Chart, for the last 60 years, we've had nonstop energy growth. We finally plateaued that in the last 10 to 15 years, and that'll color our discussion a little bit later on. This is, I think, probably something that's pretty common to everybody, pretty well known. Coal has dominated our electricity grid for a very, very long time. It is on its way out. I am of the opinion that natural gas did a lot to take the edge off of coal, but I will point also to that green line there. Renewables are starting to clear nuclear and are starting to clear coal across the country. That is what it is. I think natural gas is probably the winner of this at the end of the day, but that's the transition that has slowly been happening in the last 15 to 20 years, and it's poised to only accelerate as we go forward. So this is what the federal government thinks we might look like out to 2050. A grid that is increasingly dominated by natural gas and renewables of whatever nature. I think nuclear is going to have a much higher role than they predict here, but that is what our federal government is preparing for and what we think might happen. Economics drives a lot of this right now, and that's important, I think, to know. Obviously, natural gas has been a pretty cool story in the last 15 years. We figured out how to frack. It's a really genius technology. It unlocks 200 years worth of resources in our country. A lot of it in West Texas, some of it in Pennsylvania, but there are shale operations all across this country that are doing a very, very good job of driving the price of natural gas down and keeping it down in this country. We have an opportunity as the United States, however, in exporting that to other countries across the globe. This is an old chart. I apologize. I wasn't able to find something that illustrated it quite as good as this. But other countries around the world right now are paying 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 times the multiple of our prices for natural gas. The opportunity for natural gas in the United States of America isn't to burn it here. It's to export it and sell it to China. It's to export and sell it to countries that aren't tied to Russia. It's to export and sell it to Japan. We have a real opportunity to be the world's natural gas powerhouse and make a ton of money doing it. However, there's a downside to that as well. The more we tie our domestic natural gas markets to international markets, the more those markets start to look like oil. And oil is extremely volatile. Iran bombs Saudi Arabia and our gas price goes up 35 cents because of it. The barrel of oil goes up $5. It's extremely volatile. I think there's probably a world in the next 20 years where natural gas starts to look like that a little bit as we tie our domestic market more to international markets. So there's a little bit of a downside to that. However, I think the opportunity here is really tremendous for the United States. And right now the price of natural gas in Spain, I just saw this the other day, Spain's paying $45 an MMBTU. The price here in the United States is $4, I think, and that's higher than it's ever been for quite a few years here in the United States. So again, our opportunity is very, very real with natural gas. However, we have a downside here. We're increasingly tying natural gas to power generation and to heating. That's going to become a problem, especially this winter. If it gets really, really cold, your power demand goes up and your heating demand goes up, and supplies of natural gas start to shrink pretty quickly. So that is an inherent vulnerability that we're starting to build into our system, something for folks to think about a little bit. We've been adding wind like crazy. This just goes to 2018. That chart in the last few years continues to hockey stick up. Wind, obviously a few years ago, just passed hydro as the largest renewable source of electricity in the United States. And I like to tell people that wind power it's not a liberal thing, really. People kind of think that California is building all these things, New York is building all these things. No. The #1 states in the country for wind power and renewable power at this point, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, the Dakotas, western Minnesota, Iowa. Last year, Iowa got 60% of their electricity generation from wind alone. Now that's to their advantage. I think that's to their economic advantage. They have a lot of problems with the implementation of wind energy as well, but they've been able to keep the lights on, and they've been able to bring all of that wind generation to their own state, which I think, I'll get into it a little bit later, but I think is an advantage to them. So again, kind of the story is here, the last 10 years, renewables are up, natural gas is up. Nuclear is pretty stagnant right now, given its existing technological outlook, what it looks like right now. Obviously, coal in decline. I will tell you guys, we're adding, this is going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem for the state of Wisconsin. I don't know how folks feel about transmission lines here, but we're going to have to build more of them if we keep doing stuff like this. Increasingly, we are losing a lot of generation on the East Coast and the West Coast. We built a lot of stuff on the East Coast for the last 100 years, and we built transmission lines to run it west. Increasingly, we're going to be building stuff in the center of the country and in the south side of the country, and we're going to be exporting it east. That's going to require a completely different and reworked transmission grid than what we've built for the last 100 years. It's a big downside of renewables because renewables are sited in different areas than traditional power plants have been sited. So you're going to have to build the transmission to go with the renewables. Otherwise, we're going to have big, big log jams. So that is a cost that is not always included in the renewable energy equation. And I think people just need to be honest about it. It is a cost that should be associated with the build-out of renewables. But I think there's one reason, and there's really a reason, this is the reason that I'm standing here. I like to tell people, again, I've been in politics, I'm more of a conservative person. I spent the last 10 years of my life arguing against really renewable energy in a lot of its forms. I've made the arguments that it's not ready for prime time, it doesn't work without inefficient government mandates, it doesn't work without tax subsidies, which I don't really want to see taxpayer dollars going to this stuff. I don't know that those arguments necessarily apply anymore. In the last 10 years, we have seen the cost of solar and wind drop precipitously. Solar has dropped almost 100-fold in the last 10 years. That's why we're seeing this start to happen. It is a story that is essentially driven by economics. You can see the cost decline. Again, 10 years ago, $400 a megawatt hour is unheard of for any technology. It's just, you wouldn't want to build out solar at $400 a megawatt hour. Right now, solar's at $33 a megawatt hour. In 10 years' time, complete crash in cost. Now, there's a lot of different reasons for this, and I can get into it a little bit later, but both wind and solar are at a cost-competitive point with natural gas. All across the country now, the three cheapest sources of energy generation, if you're looking to build energy generation, it's natural gas, wind, and solar. And increasingly, wind and solar are kind of tied to a battery storage component as well, which I'm happy to talk a little bit about. But that just happened within the last few years. It is a new story, and I don't think it's being very well communicated to people. There are two advantages that I think renewables have, and again, I will start to get to the downsides of renewables. I don't want you guys to think that I'm blowing smoke. First off, you are not tied to volatile commodity markets. That is a huge advantage. You are not tied to a fuel market. You do not have to mine, you do not have to drill, you do not have to transport. Those are all cost savings, period. Now there's a downside to that. Wind and solar, the wind and the sun are intermittent and are not always blowing and are not always shining. Total downside to that, I recognize it. But there's also, I like to tell people, particularly solar panels, it's no different than the phone in your pocket or the television hanging on your wall. It's a piece of electronics. So that's what they've really figured out how to do in the last 10 years. It's the old Henry Ford example. If you make one car, you manufacture one car a day, it's super expensive, nobody can afford to buy it. You figure out how to manufacture 2,000 cars a day, you drive your unit cost down, suddenly it becomes affordable for people to take advantage, they start building the market. That has happened with wind and solar on a global scale. And it's very, very difficult, I think, to start to roll some of that back. It's the reason I can go to Walmart and buy a wall-sized television for like $300 now. It's just crazy what they've done with that technology. Solar panels in particular are not very different. So the efficiency keeps going up, unit price keeps dropping, and it becomes cheaper and cheaper for people to buy. And as you increase demand, you start building and manufacturing more of them. That's going to be tough to beat. Those two things combined, I think, are going to be really, really tough to beat. And that's why I think these technologies are probably going to be the winners in the future, although that's just my own personal bet. So the new reality in a lot of ways, maybe clean energy at this point, clean, renewable energy sources are maybe the cheaper energy sources for us. And that's what I think a lot of people are dealing with now. I don't know how much I want to get into this, but it is a really big sticking point for me. Wind and solar is not reliable, right? It is not. It is a variable source of power. The sun is not always shining, and the wind is not always blowing. That is an inherent limitation on how much you can put onto any given grid. You do not want a grid that is completely dominated by wind and solar right now, because the lights will not always come on. That is an absolute truth, and I think people need to be honest about it. We have an inherent limitation to how much you can put onto the grid. Right now in Wisconsin, I've seen studies that indicate it's anywhere from 20 to 30%, maybe up to 40% you can put on Wisconsin's grid without it starting to wobble, without the plates starting to wobble. I don't know how true that is, but this is the typical output of a solar panel. You can see obviously morning at 0%, up to 100% in the middle of the day, and back down to 0% as the sun sets. Without storage, without another technology attached to this, that's the limitation on this technology, period. It is not going to go further than generating electricity while the sun shines in the middle of the day. I will say, this is what a week of demand looks like in the Midwest. This was August of 2019, so summer demand. Pretty steady. You see demand go up in the middle of the day, down at night, up and down at night. Solar is actually fairly well situated to meet that demand to some degree. This right here is coal. This right here is natural gas. You see, nuclear is really our only base load source of power. You don't turn nuclear power plants on and off. You don't. They run, and they run very efficiently at 100%. However, coal and natural gas both ramp up and down to meet demand. Solar is fairly well situated to meet that middle of the day demand, and if you think about it, it's actually fairly efficient. 95 degrees, middle of the summer, sunniest day, that's where you can get the most output from your solar. It's also where you have your highest demand. So we're actually in a good situation here in Wisconsin to try to utilize some solar to shave the peak demand that we pay for right now. Because it's very, very expensive to turn those power plants up all the way. That's where our really, really expensive power comes from. Let's use cheap solar to knock some of that out. That's what I say. However, we're in no position to generate 100% of our supply. We're just not even anywhere near that. So again, let's be realistic about how we can use the technology to our advantage. Let's be pragmatic about it. So my business case, just personal business case for clean energy or alternative energy now, I'm not talking subsidies or mandates. I don't even really talk about the environment, guys. It's not a motivating factor for me personally. I want falling price, I want versatility. I like rural economic development. I know it is controversial, development, some of the solar development out here, but dollars and jobs and investment rolling to rural areas of the state is a good thing is a good thing on balance, in my opinion. No matter what that might look like. Business and consumer choice is going to be huge, grid diversity. At the end of the day, I care a lot about national security as well. If we can not tie ourselves so much to energy coming from other countries, I think we're better off for that period. And if we can generate our own electricity from some sun in the backyard, I'm on board with that. Let's try it, let's do it. But Wisconsin is maybe a little bit further behind or not quite there yet. Some of our other neighbors are obviously pretty far ahead of us. This has changed from 2017. Natural gas and coal have a roughly equal share now. Nuclear at about 16% is held very constant. Solar is nowhere less than 1%. Wind is nowhere either. We're still really nowhere on the implementation of these technologies. However, in the next 5 years, that is going to change pretty significantly. In the next 5 years, if all of this solar gets built, we move from roughly 0% of our energy needs from solar to about 20% in the state, which in 5 years is an unheard of change. I mean, that's extremely fast development. Not all of that is going to get built. 100%, I recognize not all of it's going to get built. Some of this stuff is extremely controversial in local communities. I totally understand that. And you can see wind and actually batteries being attached as well. These are all of the solar and wind and battery projects that I am currently tracking in the state of Wisconsin. So I don't know if it helps you guys at all, but you're not the only county and you're not the only community that is struggling with this or dealing with this. The inherent, one of the big limitations and I think one of the big drawbacks, especially of solar, is it's just not as energy dense, right? You can use 100 acres to build a 1,500 megawatt nuclear power plant, and it only disturbs that 100 acres, and it's extremely compact, extremely efficient. Or you can use 1,000 acres and build a 100 megawatt solar farm. It affects way more landowners, it affects way more communities, it affects way more land. The footprint is fundamentally set out. So more communities are gonna have to deal with energy generation than have in the past, because we're no longer deploying those super dense, super efficient technologies. We're starting to spread the footprint out across a lot of areas. I think that's to communities' advantage again. I want the money, and I want the investment in jobs to flow to rural areas, and I think that's a good thing on balance, but there are a lot of people like Gary that probably would disagree with that. The next wave, I'll just touch on this for a second, then I'll get to some questions, see if you guys have any. Batteries are already being attached to some of these large-scale, utility-scale projects. So they'll take a 1,500 acres for a solar farm, and then they'll attach a battery storage facility that's 40 acres. And that battery storage facility will essentially store the energy from that solar farm for a 4-hour duration of period. So the solar farm could shut down, no sun, for an entire 4-hour period, but the grid could still get all of the energy that it got from the solar farm, from that battery storage system, for a 4-hour period, essentially. That's a big deal because we are trying right now, especially in a lot of other states that have more of this, we're trying to deal with the shoulder hours. So the sun sets, and then you still have a very high demand before people go to sleep, essentially. And there's not a lot in there that there's like 2 hours of time before people really go to sleep that's